Hello, welcome. I'm Sarah Hercod and I work for the Early Years Southwest Stronger Practice Hub. We're one of 18 hubs working closely with the Department for Education to support with education recovery in the early years. If you follow the QR code at the top right of this screen, you'll find our website. So today we're thinking about our sensory curriculum. You will have children in your setting who have some sensory challenges. It's not necessarily autism. Before we get into the aims of today's session, I just want to do a quick recap from session 1. So hopefully you've already seen the autism session where we unpick the different challenges that come with having autism, and we looked at some of the early signs, including the strengths of being autistic. So have a little think about some of the strengths that you've observed in children. We talked about cognitive strengths, their depth of knowledge in certain areas, the way they process language, their pattern-seeking behaviours, analytical strengths, construction, engineering strengths, and then we talked about some challenges. So typically, autistic children might demonstrate some social interaction challenges, some emotional literacy difficulties, some issues around cognitive flexibility, so mindset shifting, pretend play and joint attention. So if there's delays in any of those areas, then we talked a little bit about some strategies for supporting children to move forward and progress. So have a little think about what those strategies were. The key message I wanted to get across, and I hope I did in the last training, was around consistency and our routines, but we also shared some strategies around visuals and using them in a progressive way, so knowing where to start, where to move to, and where to ultimately have children using visuals. And obviously our ultimate aim is that children acquire language, whether that's spoken language or some other form of shared interaction. We also talked about joint attention and support for children with their pretend play. We looked at using now and next, we looked at the one-page profile, and we looked at some strategies called intensive interaction and attention autism. Gosh, we covered a lot, didn't we? That was challenging for my executive function there, getting my working memory to process what we've already done whilst also thinking about what we're going to talk about today. So today we're looking at strategies for supporting children who are having some sensory challenges, and there's some key messages for you today. So sensory challenges don't always equate to a child having autistic spectrum condition, and actually having a sensory curriculum is beneficial for all children as part of your ordinarily available provision, and it can help your staff too. So it could especially help those children who've got sensory processing difficulties, and it's not our job to diagnose autism or sensory processing disorders, but we can assess, plan, do, review, and then refer for more help, can't we? So including individual children's sensory preferences in your curriculum will support emotional regulation essentially for everyone, and we also know that the child's next teacher will thank you for letting them know about the incredible work that you've done so far, the things that have worked and the things that perhaps haven't worked. So today our aims are to understand sensory difficulties that early years children might have, and to look at the strategies for supporting them in early years settings, and to work out how we could develop our curriculum to include sensory learning and development opportunities. So let's first have a quick look at what sensory processing disorder is. It's a neurological condition that affects the way the brain processes information from the senses, and people with sensory processing disorder might be extra sensitive to or not react to sensory input. So just list either in your brain or grab a piece of paper and jot down all the senses that you can think of, and we'll come back to this list a little bit later on. So sensory processing issues are often first recognised during the toddler years, when parents might notice that a child has an unusual aversion to noise or light, or shoes being too tight, or clothes textures being irritating. You might also notice an element of clumsiness, trouble climbing stairs, or difficulties around fine motor skills, like holding a pencil or a paintbrush or fastening buttons. And then there are some extreme behaviours that can come with sensory processing challenges. So screaming if their face or their body get wet, throwing tantrums when you try to get them dressed, having an unusually high or low pain threshold, crashing into walls or even people, putting things that are inedible in the mouth, including rocks and paint. The official name for that, when it's a condition, is pica. And another term that you might have come across in terms of sensory, the area of sensory needs, is integration. And this was originally a specific treatment approach. But this term is often now used to describe the idea behind the fact that the brain processes sensory information and then chooses how to respond. And we've all got different sensory integration strengths and challenges. For example, I took my dogs out for a walk this morning, and I do not like wearing my raincoat on bare arms. So it's summer, it's warm, but it's also wet. So I don't want to wear a long sleeve top under my raincoat, but putting my raincoat on and having it touching my bare arms is not something I particularly enjoy. Because autism and sensory challenges require specific expertise, occupational therapists, highly specialist speech and language therapists, I'm going to talk about us having a sensory curriculum today, which is something I've found quite transformative in my practice. But autism and sensory processing are not my areas of expertise by any means. So you would need to refer your child to support from someone who really knows this subject very well. And we'll cover this a little bit in today's training as well. Sensory processing problems are considered a symptom of autism because the majority of children and adults on the spectrum also have significant sensory issues. However, many children with sensory issues, many adults with sensory issues like myself, we don't have autism. Sensory challenges are also a feature of ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorders and other developmental delays, or with no diagnosis at all. And by providing a sensory curriculum in your setting, you're effectively supporting all children and all staff. Did you write down those senses? I'm really hoping you've got 5 at least. So there's 5 that you will know well, and then there's 3 that we're going to look at in more detail today. And I've listed them here. So the 3 that you may well have heard of in your work with early years are vestibular, proprioceptive and interoceptive. Really big words. There is some crossover between what each of those senses do, but for the sake of today's training, to adopt Alice's less is more approach, to make things a little bit easier for us to just start to understand in our brains and apply to our practice, I'm going to describe the vestibular side of things as to do with balance, and the proprioceptive side of things to do with movement, and the interoceptive side of things to do with sensations that are internal, so how you feel inside. And I hope that's helpful today. Our vestibular system is all about how our orientation impacts on our balance, and our inner ear receptors sort this information out for us in terms of balance and posture. If you've ever suffered from vertigo or labyrinthitis, you'll know what I'm talking about when I describe symptoms of swaying and spinning and fever and nausea. And that's happening because this particular area is inflamed. And vestibular input tells us what we can see around us and how our left side and our right side are working. Proprioception is all about how forces impact on movement. So this system is in our muscles, our tendons, our ligaments and our joint receptors, and it tells us where our body is in space as well as the force and the pressure that we're using. Interoceptive input is all internal. So it's the hidden sense, and it's the ability to feel what's happening inside our body, which influences on our emotions and our sense of well-being. Detecting a change in our internal state might be hunger or fullness, thirst or body temperature, heart and breathing rates, social touch, muscle tension, itches, nausea, sleepiness. Those are the sorts of things I'm talking about when I talk about interoception. Thinking about the children that you work with, what are you seeing that tells you that they're struggling with a sensory sensitivity? You might have observed that they are oversensitive to certain sensations, and those children can be labelled as anxious or irritable or angry or fearful, and we might decide that they're picky and oversensitive. There may be children who can't use their executive function well because they've got a powerful need to get away from or resist this sensitivity. And in those cases, we could end up labelling those children as being impulsive or flighty. Is this triggering any thoughts about any particular children for you? Poor body awareness could end up being labelled as clumsy. A child who's distracted by sensory issues is just simply trying to make sense of it, and they're losing learning and development time as a result of this, and could end up being labelled as immature or young for their age. But these labels are only really useful if we dig a bit deeper, aren't they? So if we start labelling a child, or we hear a colleague labelling a child, it's kind of a prompt to me to park my judgment and sort of dial up my perception and think, okay, what are they showing us? What's the message behind this? What are they trying to communicate to us through these behaviours and through their play and through their communication? And it's my job to unpick that, and I think that's why you're here today. So some children are oversensitive, and this is known as hyperarousal or hypersensitivity. So do you see any of these behaviours in the children that you're working with? And some children are undersensitive, so this is known as hypoarousal or hyposensitivity. And do you see any of these behaviours in the children that you're working with? A sensory diet is essentially a bespoke plan, a personalised plan for a specific child, and it provides the sensory input that they need to stay focused and organised and happy throughout the day. Some children may feel overwhelmed or overloaded and need to get to a calmer state with our help, and some may feel lethargic or sluggish and need some activities for them to feel more alert. The main goal of a sensory diet is to prevent sensory and emotional overload by meeting their sensory needs that are in their nervous system. It can also be used as a recovery technique. So when we haven't managed to get them to a regulated state, we can then deploy the sensory diet techniques to restore calm. But understanding a child's sensory profile and the activities that support them to be calm and regulated can really help. When the child feels overwhelmed and out of control, engaging them in sensory experiences on a regular schedule can support them with their focus, their attentiveness, their interaction. And that will lead to children feeling less anxious because they feel comfortable and in control. So, thinking about the children that you know and love, what activities are they seeking and what do they need? It's about observing, like we talked about in the last presentation. It's about a bit of trial and error, really, because what works one day might not work the next. We just need to know that child and be one step ahead at all times. And I'm just going again back to why I've called this session sensory curriculum rather than any of the other terms that are out there. It's just because so many of these techniques also benefit everyone else. And research tells us that when we teach something explicitly, in one-to-one with a child or a small group or through our continuous provision, and then we provide opportunities for that skill to be practiced in real life, it has greater impact. So if we're teaching other children about how to be inclusive around sensory needs, then we're building an environment where people are going to feel more regulated. And if you've got children with sensory challenges, they're already at risk of isolation from their social groups. So just have a think about your justification behind taking that child out for withdrawal and intervention, because that's creating more isolation in a sense, isn't it? So if the sensory curriculum is something we can embed into our universal, ordinarily available provision, I think that's worth thinking about. So let's focus on proprioception, otherwise known as deep pressure. It's a key area that really supports sensory needs because it increases calmness and attention levels, which helps with children's focus, and it can also support with emotional regulation. So one progression model for using deep pressure or proprioceptive activities is to offer it as part of your routine. Make sure that at transition times, first thing, last thing, children can access these activities, and some children then could progress to opting into it when they need it and letting you know, communicating to you that this is something that they need. And the variety of inputs could involve hugging, squeezing, massaging, swaddling, and it just generally involves gentle pressure to the limbs and the torso using a pillow or a soft toy. So we've got some examples here: pushing two pillows against each other with an adult on one side and a child on the other, and then progressing that to using your feet instead. You've got a child being squished between two cushions here and clearly enjoying it. Some children might let you know that that's not something they enjoy. And we've got bear crawling on a soft surface and underneath soft surfaces. You could also have a gym ball. Children love to bounce on that. And tack pack and story massage are two interventions that involve touch, and these come highly recommended by people I know who have used them. Story massage I found is particularly good for everyone as part of your whole curriculum offer. So think about how you might be able to include another child in this proprioception activity, because that could have, if the child is a role model, a child that's developing typically, it could have a reverse inclusion impact, because the typically developing child will learn strategies for supporting their friends. If you Google proprioceptive activities for sensory diet on YouTube, you'll find loads more ideas like this. Now, some children are touch averse and might prefer these opportunities instead. So this is a range of activities that give children access to proprioceptive input through essentially through gardening. If you look at all these activities, they tend to be the ones that happen when you're busy outside. It's basically heavy work, and heavy work activities support with our focus and our attention and our ability to participate in everyday tasks, and it's calming as well. So adding heavy work to children's daily routines will contribute to the development of their sensory processing, and children will also gain valuable strategies that they can use when they feel that they need to regulate themselves. And how often you use the heavy work input depends on individual children and the structure of your day, but it's good to be guided by the child's enjoyment levels and by their responses to the activities that you introduce. Again, more heavy work here, pushing or pulling heavy objects. TheraBands are those stretchy bands that people use in exercise classes. It'd be a good thing to include in your sensory provision. Playing on the monkey bars has huge impact for core strength development, which we know leads on to the skills that children are using in their fine motor control, such as holding a pencil. So if children are struggling with writing, then get them back on the monkey bars. Jumping activities, some of the children that you work with might show you that this is an area that they really enjoy. Those space hopper balls that I remember from my childhood, I think it's time we bring them back. And like I said before, this isn't my area of expertise, but there's a great resource called TheraPlay by Dimension that I've used in the past that has been recommended to me by Senkos and educational psychologists. So at the end of this session, if you fill out a feedback form for us, then we'll send you out some TheraPlay information, which includes all sorts of activities like this: lifting weighted items, and here's some ideas around chewing and sucking. Again, I found gardening to provide a wealth of opportunities here, because we end up creating new food experiences for the children, and so the sensory chewing experiences get embedded into the curriculum. And I've often been surprised by children's openness to try out new textures and flavours if they've grown the food and prepared it themselves. So if you have any money in your budget from, I don't know, from special needs funding, to buy a smoothie maker or a soup maker or ingredients to make bread and add herbs to it. We've been adding lavender to shortbread recently, and that's really delicious. If you add the leaves and the flowers, not just the flowers, then it has an even better flavour. It smells good too. So if you've got children in your setting that are really struggling with regulation due to their sensory processing issues, then using an IEP, or that's an individual education plan, or an individual behaviour plan, to demonstrate that you've tried a sensory diet along with other strategies to support the child in their environment or with their communication. Then if you feel the child isn't making progress and is often still in a state of dysregulation, then you can use that as evidence to make a referral. You could refer for support from an occupational therapist. Parents can also do that through their GP. You can do it through the local authority special needs team. But doing this curriculum and diet work first will give you a better idea of the child's strengths and challenges and their sensory profile. So that was a quick whiz through the strategies that we can use for sensory processing challenges. If you follow this QR code to the feedback form and complete it again, because hopefully you will have already given us some feedback from the autism session, then we can send you the information out about TheraPlay. Take a minute to reflect on something you will share with the parent of a child that you work with. 2 things that you might take away to share with your colleagues, and 3 things that you might change or do more of as a result of this session. I've just realised it says at the bottom here, next session sensory curriculum. That was this session. I've obviously used the same slide twice. You caught me out on that one. There is no next session, but we are here. The hub is here until the end of October 2024. So do contact us if you need any specific support around IEPs, EHCPs, or your local authority special needs team are also available to support you as always. Thanks for attending. Bye.